We are sitting down with an absolute titan of South African aviation. He started his career walking the beat as a young constable at Pretoria Central in 1980 and retired just a few weeks ago as the longest serving pilot in the history of the South African Police Service Air Wing. Serving under 11 national commissioners, he has logged an astonishing 16,900 flight hours, split almost perfectly between fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters. He has flown almost everything from the Pilatus Porter to the Cessna Sovereign jet, the MD-500 and the BO-105. He has flown Nelson Mandela, survived the catastrophic engine failure right over Pretoria, and after 46 years in the force, he still has the exact same passion for the sky as day one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the studio, Lieutenant Colonel Div de Villiers. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel de Villiers. Man, what a privilege. And I just want to start off with this quickly.
Hello, Ruben.
Hello, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Pleasure's mine.
I watched the video, and we're going to get to that a little bit later.
Okay, which video did you watch?
The final flight.
Oh, the final flight? Helicopter or?
The helicopter one.
Oh, yes.
And let me tell you, when I watched that video this morning, I was shedding tears like you cannot believe. What a moment. But we're going to get to that.
I was shedding tears as well, I promise you.
I actually heard that. I heard that on the radio.
Very emotional.
Yeah. Thank you, and welcome to the podcast, and thank you that you're willing to share the stories with us, and we're really looking forward to tell your story, because what an unbelievable career you've had in the police. Let's go all the way back to young Lieutenant Colonel de Villiers. Where did you grow up, and where were you born, and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Really not much to tell about it. Born and bred, well, those days, Pretoria, but went to school in Centurion, and
Woeries.
Woeries, yeah, it was Woeries, and then, it was Woeries first, and then Littleton, and then Centurion, and all of those. But yeah, matriculated there in 79, and battled through school, and I saw some of the questions, and I somehow, by hook or by crook, I managed to do the maths and the science and all of those. I have it officially,
right,
but definitely not a guru on the subjects. But I managed to get through it, and and then mum and dad. My mum was in the nursing business. My dad was a building inspector. We were I have an older brother and a younger sister, and then a brother that died when I started high school in Standard 6. Then he was in matric, and then he passed away. So it was the three of us growing up, and then, as in those days, you had to do your national service. And then I actually, before I joined the cops, I went to 4 SA Infantry Battalion in Middelburg. And then I was there for in 2 weeks, 3 weeks odd. And then the cops came along, and then they were looking for servicemen of guys from the army to come and join the police, and at that stage, I earned $85 a month.
Crazy.
And the police offered $365 a month.
Wow.
So what a decision. So, and moving back to Pretoria. So that's how I actually started in the cops.
Just before we go there, because I want to elaborate on that as well, but just back at school again, I just want to get to this quickly, because you mentioned about the maths and the science as well. And all of us knows that if you're going to be flying and you're going to follow a flying career, math especially is critical, and even science. So did you just get by with those subjects at school?
I just got by.
Wow.
And the guy that I started my flying in the police vessel van der Berg, no maths at school at all. So if you can manage a scientific calculator,
exactly,
Bob's your uncle.
Exactly. And sporting wise as well, I want to get to that, because I do believe that you were quite a long distance runner. You weren't scared for that type of stuff.
I tried my utmost, but it wasn't in one of the best. But I was saying the top couple. But sport, rugby, and the long distance running, and all of those. But nothing special to say. But rugby, I managed to play for the first team of the school from standard
Did you
8,
now?
8 9
Okay.
and 10. So, yeah, I had a rough idea with that.
Yeah.
And the others are just doing it for the fun and keeping busy. Eh?
Yeah, but I do believe that the reason that you might have not done so well with the academic is there was a specific goal that you wanted to go and see on a frequent basis, rather, Lieutenant Colonel. Is,
Yeah, well, I stayed in the Centurion and the school was there and she was in Menlo Park.
yeah.
And initially, you won't believe this, but that was like now from standard 8, standard 9, somewhere there, that I went to visit her with a skateboard.
What?
With a skateboard,
How cool is
with
that?
a skateboard
Epic.
and the backpack, and now it's there through Menlo Park and Waterkloof and all those. Then you walk up the hill and skateboard down the hill. And then at some stage, one of the stories I can tell you about that is now it's a new girl and I want to impress her. So
Yeah.
I persuaded my mum, brand spanking new shirt and brand spanking new denim trousers. And then I saw this serious downhill thing and I thought to myself, man, I just might fall.
Oh.
So you know what, now this is a new shirt. So let's take off the shirt. All right, so I took off the shirt. And then the trousers, oh man, if I fall, I'm going to flip and damage my trousers.
You kept it on?
So I kept it on, but I rolled it up to above my knees. And long story short, I went downhill and I fell. And I was like full of blood and bruises and stuff, but the clothes they were good.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is an amazing story.
And then my mum bought me then she saw me with a skateboard and all of those, and then my parents, bought me a motorcycle when I came up for the age of 16 with a 50, and then I visited with the 50.
Was that an MBX?
No, it was a Suzuki GS50.
Oh, nice.
But like I say, then I could visit the girl with a 50, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you grew up you grew up a fairly happy family as well. And so on.
Yeah. Nothing funny and no aviation orientation at all.
I was going to ask that now because, I mean, your background, I mean, you had such a brilliant career. We're going to dive into that, but not at all. Like dad, grandfather, somebody older that in your generation?
Nothing. The closest was across the corner, one of the neighbors. He was working in the Air Force, but
Okay.
I only saw him every now and then in his uniform and all of those, but yeah, that was not the reason why, or that bugged me to try the aviation thing.
So what was the plan for you growing up? As a boy, did you dream of becoming a pilot or was it
No.
something else?
No, not at all. When I left school, and that was maybe those days, what was good about national service is when you left school and you had no idea where you're going, then you had 2 years on the government's expense going to the border and all of those. And then you start as a kid and 2 years later you're a man. And your mindset and your perspective, all of those changed. And at some stage I even applied to become a mechanical engineer.
Really?
And they at Palindaba and between the admin and all of those, I received a letter to say, listen, don't call us, we'll call you. And that's when I joined the police full-time because that was still at my national service. And then out of the blue, I received a call from them, say, where are you? You were supposed to start 2 days ago. And then I said, you know what, sorry, I joined the police full-time now. And
Can you believe it?
so I could have been a mechanical engineer.
Okay. All right. So then you joined the police as what?
As the first 2 years, national service as a constable.
Okay.
And then I joined permanently still as a constable, and that was in Pretoria Central Police Station in town in Pretoria.
Okay.
And then, there was those days we call it a warrant. If you go in Afrikaans, they call it a AO,
Okay.
a warrant officer.
Yes.
And that was one rank that I told myself, I never want to have that rank. And we call it in Afrikaans a ORO. So, an old warrant officer. I said to myself, that is the last rank.
Why?
Because you are stuck and you're full of whatever you can call it, because you're going nowhere. And then you just give all the people underneath you a hard time.
Right.
So then I started my studies with the police, studied to become the national certificate to become a sergeant, and then the national high certificate to become a warrant officer, and then the national diploma becoming a lieutenant those days.
How long did that take you?
Well, no, not that long. I qualified as a lieutenant in 87 and I started 82. Yeah, let's make it from 83 to 87, and then my studies were done and dusted.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Right. And then what happened from there onwards? I mean, obviously you had to somehow make the transition to become a pilot. And how did that happen?
You know what? Our house is between Waterkloof Air Force Base and Swartkop Air Force Base.
Okay.
In those days, the Air Force, they still had money and fuel and aircraft and all of those. So, and every Wednesday afternoon, it was night flying, and you hear these machines and you see these machines. Yes, and looking at all of those, and I thought, yeah, that looks like it can be working for a living. And then I started giving it some thought and all of those. And as a kid in high school, the closest, obviously, model aircraft that you built, but I can't say like a small kid, yeah, this is all I want to do.
Yes.
But I had model aircraft that I built, and I even had these, it's got the little engine thingy, and then it's got the rope on the wing, and then you stand in the middle, and this thing flies around you in circles. I had a PT-19 flight trainer that they call it those days. So I had that as well, and I suppose that's where it started. And then around about the age of 26, 27, I told myself, you know what, if you want to do this, you must do it now. If you don't really do something, it's just going to disappear and you're going to carry on with your life.
Are you talking about the flying now?
The flying aspect.
So what did your parents say about that? What was there about?
Money was an issue.
Yeah.
And I was like freshly married. And then, all the policies I had and all of those, I took it to the bank, and the bank loaned me money. And my dad helped me as well. And that's where I got the money. And then being an officer or a police officer at that stage, you could, at a very reasonable rate comparing to the civilian flight schools, I went to Defence Flying Club at Swartkop Air Force Base.
Right.
And that's where I started.
Okay.
And
Your uncle, I believe, also played a huge role. Is it Jerry, your uncle?
No, I call him my uncle.
Right.
I don't know if you can recall, maybe before your time, I don't know, there was a furniture advert that they called, and the furniture was a guy with the name of Joshua Daw.
Yeah, your uncle in the furniture business. Yes.
And Colonel Jerry Brouberg, he was my mentor in the Air Wing, and I call him my uncle in the aviation business.
Why?
Because if I have a problem, I pick up a phone and I bell him and he helps me.
Yes, right.
And if he can't help me, he knows who can.
So just tell me a little bit about him. Was he a pilot as well?
Yes, he's from the Air Force.
Air Force pilot. Okay.
Air Force pilot.
So he actually took you under his wing.
Yeah, I started in the Air Wing after I got my my rank as a lieutenant, and I did my fixed wing PPL with Defence Flying Club those days.
Okay.
And then I told myself, you know what? And then the Air Wing started. That was 85-ish, I think.
Okay.
And then, like everything, they don't know me. And those days, if you're not from the Air Force, you can't fly.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's only the Air Force guys that could fly. The service, they were not on the map. And then there was a guy there, a guy with the name of Wessel van der Berg, and he was a policeman as well. And then he got the opportunity as well, and the police trained him. And then, being a policeman, I went to him, and I think that stage he was a captain. And then I went to him and said, well, Captain, yes, please, man, I'm busy with my PPL and all of those, and I just want to get into the aviation business, because if I'm here, then they get to know me, and if should something happen, I might be first in line. So then I got the opportunity to start as a pen pusher and flight planning and updating the Jeffersons and the AICs and all of those. So it was like in a sideline thing and helping to push out the helicopter, and that's basically how I started. And then, in the environment, I got the opportunity, and then the police started training me from scratch.
Let's talk about your PPL. I want to pause there just for a split second. What did you train on?
Cessna 150.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
And that was in what year did you say?
Let's make it 87,
87. That's
87.
where you started with your first. Tell us about that training those years. How was it for you those years? And especially the very first flight, the very first time you went up, because I normally say this and I usually say this. I still remember exactly, and I was very young when I did that. I think I was in standard 5 those years, grade 7. And I can still remember the very details of my very first flight. Can you remember that?
Oh, yes, I can. Because I've never flown in my life. And then, obviously, now I'm in the cops, I have some money and all of those. And then I went to the skydiving club here at Wonderboom. The Wonderboom Skydiving Club those days.
That was before the PPL?
That was before the PPL.
Okay.
I've never flown in my life before.
Okay.
And my first flight was in a PC-6 Pilatus Porter.
Kidding me.
And chucking me out of a serviceable aircraft.
Oh, it did.
It was horrific.
So you actually jumped out?
Yeah, out of a serviceable aircraft, and I jumped out by choice. But I didn't expect it to be so scary.
Tandem or solo?
Solo.
So you trained?
I trained physically,
Okay.
with the static line and all of those. But all I can remember is like in the guy say go, and I just felt myself doing. And when I just, oh shit, I'm underneath a canopy. Thank goodness. If it wasn't for the static line, I would have been dead. It was horrific.
Crazy. So that was the very first time that you tasted flight?
A flight, yes.
Okay.
And then obviously Defence Flying Club, when I started with, the first flight was with a guy that was my instructor at the end of the day, a guy with the name of Chris Berger. He took me for an introductory flight.
Okay.
And that was there towards Harabespoort Dam, and let me feel, and the changes of the speed and the height and the throttle thingy in the dashboard and all of those.
Yeah.
And then I said, this is it.
And that's when you started, enrolled, and then you went through it.
And then I said, you know what? I love this. And then, like I told you, I managed to get enough money so I could start and finish. So I got into that, and we virtually flew every day, every second day, every weekend, and we kept on. So I pushed it like in quick.
How did it go with the subjects?
Okay-ish, if you compare it with the commercial subjects. Yeah, and like I say, I mentioned to you at some stage as well that Glenn Dowell, he was my NavGen instructor.
Can you believe
Yeah,
that?
he was a lieutenant in the Air Force those days.
Yes.
Yeah, he was my NavGen instructor.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you completed your PPL. Obviously, went through that. Did your first solo flight, which is obviously something that everybody always remembers as was really special. Did that, and then you tested for your PPL. What was the?
If I can come back to that first flight, I can't say it's special. It's scary.
The solo flight.
Yes.
It is, right?
Because there's no one now next to you.
I know.
So if you stuff it up.
But you know what was the craziest thing for me personally? I've never had a better landing than that one. Why is that? Was that the same for you, or wouldn't you necessarily say that? I suppose you can't really, because you've had 16,900 hours of flight.
Yeah. I won't say that was my best. I had especially now with the Sovereign, with that trailing link undercarriage and all of those, and the PC-12 for that matter. If you really want to concentrate on, and you can put her down that she just arrives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Epic. Right, so you went through the fearful flight the very first time.
But I have one story to tell.
Please do.
Now that I think about it, and Defence Flying Club myself now in this little 150 thing. And then the Air Force had the DC-3s and the DC, I think the one with the 4 engines, the DC, is it the DC-6?
I think so.
The Sky Master anyhow, I don't know if it's a 6 or what it is. Now, all of these ones are standing there on the flight line, busy with engine run-ups and all of those. And now I have to taxi behind them to get to the threshold. But now you're a appy.
Student.
You know nothing.
I know.
And your situational awareness, you can't even spell situational awareness. And now I'm sitting here in this small little thingy and behind these aircraft, and then I caught
Massive engines.
I caught that prop wash and that little aircraft, and what is position? But the aircraft was all over the show, and it wings rocking and clack, clack, clack. I said, what happened now? These bloody aircraft.
Luckily you got out of it though, without any incident.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But it was just that. So what is this?
That could have ended up very badly. Yeah, because that's an small engine, so blowing up those thrusts, Right, so then tested, right, PPL? And then what was the plan for you? Did you know you were going to go all the way to commercial?
Yeah,
or was it just
no. That was the plan. And then my wife, family, and school friends. Then I met up with a guy with the name of Leon van Kruinberg. He is dead due to a car accident as well. And he was flying in Mozambique. And at that stage, he managed to have 2 chieftains and all of those. And a lot of contracts there up in Moz. And he was instructor rated. So long story short, then I ended up with him in Mozambique, building hours since he's the instructor.
Yeah, so I just want to get the timelines correct here. So at that point, you left the police.
No. I've
was
never
before.
left the police.
So that was even before you joined all this.
No, that was when I was a police officer.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So they put in leave.
Okay.
Go to Moz and bumming hours. And when he comes back and he needs to ferry an aeroplane up and down, phones me, listen, can you come with?
Nice.
And so climbing the ladder, building the hours.
What did you fly there?
With him, I flew Baron 55 and Chieftain Cessna 402C, quite a lot of hours in those ones.
With your PPL?
With my PPL, building the hours. And
so you had a multi-engine rating before your com?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, on the Chieftain. And then on the Cessna 210 and all of those. So slowly but surely climbing the ladder, getting the hours, and as you know, taking the books, doing the studies and the subjects and all of those.
And I mean, let's just stop there for a moment. And I'm so glad we can discuss this, because I think you're the first person that I can discuss this with, because the way that you did your com those years, it was a lot harder, please correct me if I'm wrong, than today, because I do believe that you didn't write on computers. You had to handwrite your exams those years, and you had what you called negative marking. Is that correct?
That is correct. And well, I've never written the new exams. I can't tell you how difficult it is. But those days, I suppose it's the same difficulty and the same theory around it. But what it made difficult for us those days is you had 8 subjects or 9 subjects. You had a exam and a B exam. But under the A exam, it covered 8 subjects.
Okay.
So let's say, for instance, you managed to pass in 6 of the 9, and the other 3 didn't go well, and with a negative marking system, it pulled you down. Then it's not like in the one that you rewrite. You rewrite all the 8 or 9 of them. Yeah.
Hectic.
Yeah, that was tough.
Is that what the whole negative marking thing is all about? Or what does it entail exactly?
Yeah, well, long story short, if you don't know the answer, you can't guess what you think might be the answer, because if you have in the one is correct and the other one is more correct. So which one is the better?
Yeah.
And if you choose the wrong one, then it's not naught, it's -1.
Ek hoor jou.
See, yeah.
Hectic. Right, so fast forward then. So you finish your subjects, you build the hours, which I suppose is great hours. And then in 1992, you obtained your commercial, your com.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Where did you do that?
Well, once again, one of the instructors there at the National, well, those days we call it Johan Coetzee, but today it's the National Heliport.
Okay.
One of the helicopter pilots there with me, old Piet van Riet, instructor rated, but fixed wing instructor rated as well. So he groomed me and helped me with all the different, the night flying, the VP prop, the retract, all of those. So he did a lot of my fixed wing training, and he groomed me for my commercial test. And as I mentioned, my test was with Basie van der Bent those days. And the poor guy with a DC-3 years later took off. He had Wonderboom runway 1 and aircraft was not trimmed.
Oh, man.
And as he rotated, she just went up and
Oh, no. Hectic.
crash and burn. Yeah.
That's sad.
Yes.
That is terrible.
But that's, yeah, and he did my, yeah, and those days, what's actually nice, I don't know how the Oaks do that now, but old Pete insisted, white shirt, long sleeves, tie, look snazzy, man.
All the way.
All the way.
Yeah. I spoke to somebody about this specifically, where they said your commercial career doesn't start the day that you walk into your first official commercial job. It starts the very first day that you enroll for your SPL. That's when your commercial career starts. And
Indeed.
that's where you need to start getting the procedures and the airmanship and everything. You need to get that correct from the word go. It doesn't start when you sign out on your com, right?
That's correct. And yeah, aviation business, as you know, you never stop learning, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Even today where I'm now, I still learn. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so got your com fixed wing.
Yes.
Got that, right.
Yes.
So now the thing is, you got your com, what did you do after that?
Well, while I was busy with my fixed wing com, then I worked myself into the air wing as a pen pusher and a bottle washer and all of those.
Yes.
And then I got my fixed wing commercial license, and then the police at that stage, they bought the PC-6s.
Okay.
And then the pilots that were there, they flew a 402 and a King Air 200 and a Beech 400 jet.
Okay.
And so obviously, and the Porter is not your easiest aircraft to fly. She's got the tendency to bite you. But it was a golden opportunity for me. Now I'm commercially rated on a fixed wing. So I asked for a conversion, and the same guy that did my commercial prep, Piet van Riet, I did my Porter training with him. And yeah, so then the police okayed, and I did my training, and then I was Porter rated. And then I started flying the Porter. But that was, looking back at it, yes, it was crazy stuff, because now I'm a dedicated helicopter pilot that side, flying full-time helicopters, and every now and then these guys they running out of drivers, so then I haven't touched the Porter for like in 2 months or something odd, and now suddenly there's a flight, and now I must get into the Porter, and the Porter and the crosswind and with the tail drag and all of those, it can become hairy, and now you haven't touched the thing for 2 months, and now you go and fly. And then you end up in a lacquer crosswind and all of those. So that was a serious learning curve. Eh?
Any incidents on the Porters?
Any incidents?
On the Porters?
Fortunately not, but the craziest one, when I started flying the Porters and getting to know what type of aircraft, it's a magic aeroplane. But to fly it, yeah, she's a beast. And but you have to, when you go in for a landing, you have to go and sit up straight. You have to concentrate.
Okay.
You must really go and sit up straight. Make sure where the wind is coming from. And make sure what is your plan of action. Are you going to crab or cross controls and all of those?
Okay.
And then you have to make sure you are ready to touch the brakes. So now you're on the pedals, but with your heels. And your toes are there in case of snakebite that you need those brakes for directional control. If the crosswind is strong enough, you can give a all input, but she still goes. And now you have to touch the brake
Yeah.
to assist you. And if you don't get all of that together, it's a challenge.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And
actually,
then
you
you
can't.
need a- and then you need-
It's a challenge.
Yeah, but then you need some open field, right?
Yeah.
Because if there's anything in the
and
way, it's-
many of my colleagues, you just see dust and bussies and off the runway. And,
Maybe a tough question, but would you rate yourself a natural pilot, born natural pilot,
no, I'm the average.
just well trained?
I would say so. Yeah, I was fortunate. Like I say, the training that I started on the helicopter side, all those guys were from the Air Force. The instructors were from the Air Force, and the other guys are guys that spent how many time in the bush. So they had actual operational bush flying experience.
Okay.
So now I had the privilege, and it isn't like in nowadays that maybe you just get signed out. I was under my uncle in the aviation business, very strict. Like in, let's say, a normal crime prevention sortie. I just can't go. I say, okay, you can go now and do crime prevention sorties. I still flew with the other guys leg for leg doing crime prevention, and then we think I'm ready for that, and then they do if I can call it a check ride, and then they tell Colonel Brobeck, listen, okay, this oak is now ready for you to see if he's fit for that.
Right.
Then I do the check ride with him, and then I'm getting side out. I can do a crime prevention by myself now. But then I carry on with the other stuff with the other pilots again, climbing the ladder. But so I got signed out with each thing I had to do.
I don't know how much you can elaborate on this, but what exactly does that entail? A sortie like that, crime prevention, what does that entail exactly?
Normally, it changed a lot. But those days, on crime prevention, we liaised with the police station before, and then they said, okay, we're going to allocate, let's make it 4. Well, then they had enough cars as well. Like in 4, 5, 6 cars with markings on the roof and call signs and all of those.
Okay.
And then you go into a specific area with the vehicles. And they just patrol. And if they see something and they need your assistance, they call you in and say, listen, come and check behind the walls, we can't see, type of thing. And when I see something and I need them to come and check it out, I'm telling them, listen, look where I'm circling, come in my direction. And then the crew that's flying with, as we call them now, an ALIO, an Airborne Law Enforcement Officer, then that oak speaks to the guy on the ground and directs him to come and assist us.
Is it dangerous?
Normally not, but it can become dangerous because if you end up with the wrong guy at the wrong time, then it happened, and it still happens that they decide to shoot at you, and it can become dangerous. Yes.
Can I ask this? Should that happen? Should you pick up? Okay, or I'm getting shot at currently. Like, what is ops normal in that case? What do you do?
Well, I've asked a question. I don't know if I've really been shot at because
Right.
you're not going to know that. And unless they hit the helicopter. You hear the shots and you can see the muzzle flashes,
Yeah.
but you don't know in which direction it's directed. And I promise you, for that oak from the ground to hit the helicopter in flight, it must be a good shot or very, very lucky shot.
Right.
But you see, the first thing, get out of there and okay. All right. What are we going to do now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So, I mean, you did the fixed wing, then you flew the Porters, you flew the helicopters then for the SAPs at that point as well. Like, what did you enjoy the most starting off at? Very unfair question. It's like choosing between your children. I know.
It's like I told you, my aviation career, especially, on the helicopter side, I call it a fairy tale. Because the police sent me from scratch. I think the PPL those days was like in 50 hours odd.
Right.
But they sponsored me for 70 hours at the NAC flight school at Rand Airport.
Wow.
Which included night flying and mountain flying and all of those. And man, 70 hours. You are clueless, basically.
Yes.
You have a paper now to say you can fly and you've been checked and the boxes are ticked. But when you really sit there, are you really ready for that? And from that, I ended up getting a conversion on a twin turbine helicopter, BO-105.
Wow.
Can you imagine from a R22 into a BO-105? Yeah, what a fairy tale. And then and then from the 105, I started climbing the ladder, spraying Dagga, and ended up flying the BK-117s and all
Hold
of
on.
those.
I want to stop you there. What did you say just now? Spraying Dagga.
Spraying Dagga, yes.
Explain that to me.
The police had, we still have 2 of them left. Those days they call it a Use 500. Today they call it the MD 500. Basically, tanks underneath the helicopter and booms on the side, and specific target areas that we know, more renowned, Port St. John's, Lusiki, that part of the world, or a couple of hotspots in KZN. Then you physically, we go in on an operation like in 2-3 weeks, mostly like in 2 or 3 helicopters, and then 1 helicopter that we call a top cover. So he sits on top and direct you, say, listen, up the valley to the left or to the right. And then you physically, and you get used to how Dagga looks from the sky or from the air, and then you go and spray them with chemical.
Right. Okay. So I'm glad you just cleared that, because I thought that you actually sprayed Dagga out of the. I was going to say now.
Spray the Dagga with a chemical. Yes.
Exactly. So kill the Dagga, right?
Yeah, kill the Dagga.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's actually, and the chemical that we use is actually environmental friendly.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You don't see it that it harms the environment, and then when you spray it, you can only see the damage like in 5, 6, 7 days later. Then you can see how the plants start dying. So you over how can I call it? Give them over vitamins, so it grows itself dead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Overfeed kind
Overfeed
of
type
like,
of thing.
for lack of a better term. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Right. Okay. So you've got your unbelievable chopper ratings. You've got the PC6 and so on, and now you're
But
flying.
while you're talking that,
Yeah.
on the helicopter side, since I was building ours, I received the designator or the call name or nickname or something,
I was going to ask. Yeah.
the Hawk,
Okay.
because I hawked all the hours. And now, like I explained to you earlier, now I'm signed out to do crime prevention sortie. So this was now my first official crime prevention sortie to Rustenburg. And I got the early years and I pre-flight the helicopter and everything is nice. And those days, every Wednesday, the pastor comes in and, yes, are we all right? And read from the Bible and pray and all of those. And when we finished with all of those, and now I'm on my way to go and do my crime prevention sortie.
Yeah.
So now I look at my colleagues, in those days we had like in 3 or 4 helicopters on the pad, and we were 9 pilots there per day.
Sure.
So it was hectic. But now everybody is clicking around me, and I want to know what is this now? And I walk, and then everybody is here around me. And as I got close to the door, they grabbed me. And then they took me to the next to the helipad, where the lights were. It's like in a concrete slab block with a little wire thing there in the middle of the concrete. So what they did is they cuffed me, put a handcuff on my wrist and cuffed me through that little wire thingy. So I couldn't move. Now I'm sitting there on the grass next to the concrete slab.
Sorry, where was this?
At the National Heliport in Pretoria West.
Right.
Yeah, so they cuffed me, and then they brought me an umbrella. And they and they brought me a packet of peanuts and a bottle of water for the day. And there Piet van Riet comes down to the helicopter that I pre-flight and prepared. And he hopped in the helicopter, and there he went off on my first crime prevention sortie to Rustenburg. And there I sat, cuffed to the helipad for the day. And everybody come and chat a little bit to me and says, hey, see how it feels to sit here and you just see there the helicopter comes and go. Yeah. That's what you are doing to us now. You can feel what it feels like.
Crazy.
So they cuffed me there to the helipad, but now being an old cop, I know what cuffs, how the key looks like. So there, when I looked around, I saw this pieces of wire, and then I started bending the wire, and then I used the concrete slab and like in filing the piece of wire until it looked like a handcuff key.
Yeah.
And I managed to unlock myself.
Hectic.
But yeah, I sat there cuffed for the day.
I suppose on a deeper side, though, I mean, that's, I suppose, probably brought a bigger appreciation for what you get to do every single day, going through that.
Well, like I say, I always joke to say it beats working for a living. And I've been asked, looking back at my career, if you can call it a success story, what do I think made it so successful? And from those days and even up to today, like in Gusting 17,000 hours later, I'm still having a ball.
Yeah.
So it's not a job. I've been told getting to 3,000 hours, it's going to become another job. But still up to today, yes, I enjoy it. I love it.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Let's get to the highs and the lows of the career. We're going to get to the conversion to the bigger aircraft and stuff like that. I've got pictures and stuff. I can't wait to have you chat us through that. But let's get to some of the absolute highs of your career. Let's start there. What would you say, looking back over an unbelievable 46 years in aviation, if you had to single out your biggest moments, what would you call that?
That is a good question. Are you talking about flying-wise, or basically highlights in my career itself?
I would say anything that stood out in the aviation career for you for the past 46.
What was great? Yeah, I can call it a highlight is because I grew up in an environment, like I told you earlier, between or with Air Force pilots as a civilian coming in between them, but they trained me, but I wasn't Air Force trained. And with these guys, to made it, to got my license and get my wings on a parade with the Special Task Force. General Johan van der Merwe was still the commissioner those days, and he came physically and he brought the wing and he put the wing there on your chest. That was I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was awesome. And on the flying side, all the different every time the conversion was. But I don't suppose it's a highlight, but it's still a highlight when you fly that thing by yourself. But standing out, yes, like I would say one of the ones definitely standing out is when the cops bought the Cessna Citation Sovereign.
Oh, what a crap. I just want to, while you talk about that, I actually want to show them people just the photo of that. But you can keep on.
I had the opportunity with the commanding officer those days was Colonel Brian Norden. And I had, that's my goal, right? 2008. And we went to the US, did the conversion. That was horrific, because I'm like in an old school pilot, as we call it, the green needle guys. And now there's the green needle guys on the instruments. For those who don't know what green needles are,
I don't, yeah.
It's like in your VOR and all of those,
right,
with your inbound track and outbound track, or your radios and all of those.
Yes.
It's a green needle, and you have a little knobby that you have, and you fly your ILS on the glide and on the localizer, green needles.
Right.
And now that machine, she's got the old green needles, but we call it's for the children of magenta.
Yes.
Those pink line thingies. And now we are old school, myself and Brian. And now if I can call it, our management systems in the Beechjet and the Learjet that we flew at that stage is like in a Garmin GPS 100, like in almost just a go to point A, and you put in coordinates and you go to point A, and that was the management of the thing. And now suddenly, you can see those screens there, what they call a FMS, flight management system. Now you have to get to used to that stuff after you are the Green Needle generation, and now you are joining the children of Magenta. So myself and Brian, what we did, and the conversion took virtually a month.
Right.
With the notes and all of those, they give you this big picture thingy of the instrument panel. Now you press stick there next to the hotel room, and you flip and paste it there against the wall. Now you take 2 chairs, go and sit in front of the instrument panel.
Chair flying at its best.
And I tell you, take the checklist, and now one is the pilot, and other one is the co-pilot, and there we're flying in the hotel room, eh? Just to make sure that when we get to the sim, that we have idea what we're doing and not looking like idiots type of thing.
Yeah.
But that was a challenge.
Tell me about the very first time that you landed this beast.
Yeah. That was in Wichita on the maintenance flights, but that wasn't really, because that was with a factory test pilot and all of those, and he was with me and all of those, so you really didn't feel how awesome it is.
Yeah.
But when we had the privilege after the conversion of flying the machine back, 20 hours later via Canada and the Azores and Accra and all of those back to SA. And landing that thing there in Canada, and that was in the middle of the winter. So it is snow and ice and stuff. And you know what? Yes, and she just so smooth.
Yeah.
And for us from SA that's not familiar with cold, crazy. Now we end up there, the evening it was minus 40. And the next morning when we left, and pre-flight and all of those, and now we want to leave, open the throttles, but the machine is not moving.
Wow. Okay.
I said, oh shit, who forgot the chocks? Brian, chocks. No man, we pulled the chocks. No. Now, you have to shut the left engine to open the door, because now something gets loose and it goes through the engine.
Yeah.
So now we shut the left engine, getting up, chocks are gone. Close door, start the engine again. Long story short, when we landed, the tires were hot and everything was icy and all of those, so it melted the ice. So the aircraft froze to the apron.
You've got to be kidding me.
I tell you, and when we opened the throttles the next morning, the aircraft didn't want to move due to the ice. So you had to excess power to break the ice. Crazy, eh?
You are kidding me.
Yeah.
What?
Crazy stuff, yeah.
And I mean, now you're obviously also very well aware of the icing on the wings at that point.
Yeah, but it was clear. It was it was clear, but it was just ice cold.
Yeah, I
ice,
can believe it,
ice
yeah.
cold. And like I say, with the hot tires, because we landed in a rainstorm and all of those the previous late afternoon, and now with all the water and the hot tires, she actually melted. And then during the evening with a minus 40, she froze onto the apron. Yeah. Crazy.
I noticed that you said as well, for so many people during COVID, it wasn't a great time for many people during COVID, but you had a blast during COVID, to say it.
Yeah. Can you believe it that you really can say COVID was good to me? Yeah, first of all, what was great is due to COVID, as you know, there wasn't much going on. Hardly any cars on the road. Everybody needs to stay indoors, and little bit of movement, a little bit of that. No aircraft flying. The only aircraft that was flying, where's she now? Okay, the picture's gone.
I'll pop it up.
Is that old girl, that ZS SAP?
There she is.
She was the only aircraft flying in South Africa. Yeah. So I have the feather in my cap to say, I sat in SA, the only part of a crew, but the only crew in the only aircraft in the sky in South Africa.
Crazy.
And now out of Cape Town, after departure, 110 out left, routing for destination. That's it, eh?
Must be crazy.
And then what was good, COVID as well, all the training organizations and all of those closed, no training happened and all of those. So we ended up in a situation that we couldn't train crew to carry on with the jet.
Yeah.
And so we ended up in a situation that, I started running out of time. And then, there was no one. And then I got a 3-year extension to carry on.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and then 2 years later, still no one, and then I got another 2. And now it's done. Done and dusted.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not an easy thing to train. I mean, it takes time
Yeah, yeah,
for that type of training as well.
it is.
Right, let's go to your awards that you have won. I believe that during your career, the 46 years, there must have been some standout moments award-wise as well. Are there anything that pops up that you can think of?
Yeah, if you can call it an award. Those days when you went to the border, and if you spent enough time at the border, you for so many days and being there, you got a medal, a border medal.
That is cool.
And then if you ended up in situations there, what we called those days contacts, so you physically had contacts with the other side of the spectrum, then they gave you 2 little aloe plants. It's in a triangle thingy. And then for each contact that you had, they put this aloe thingies on this medal. So, yeah, I received those as well. But lately, or what I can remember, is, basically 3. One is just walking the extra mile for the cops, and we were a team, and then we got nominated, and we got a certificate for that one. And then other one that was special because flying the jet, I was very much involved flying the top management and the commissioners and ministers and all of those.
Yes.
So, yeah, then I got nominated by the National Commissioner personally, because the police, every year they nominate guys that would walking the extra mile and doing something good for the cops. But this one is different. It's a nomination by the commission himself.
Sure.
So he chose who's going to be on the list. So, yes, I got nominated for that one.
That is brilliant, yeah.
And then the other one was operational nomination. I was flying fixed wings at that stage, and the guys there in Pretoria West, they ran out of drivers on the helicopter. So I stood in for them flying the helicopter for the day, and we ended up with a serious skirmish there at the carousel.
Yeah.
With cash and transit guys.
Tell us about that, because I remember that story.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, if you haven't been there, it's actually unreal, because the task force, they were ready because they had inside information, so they were prepared and all over the show, waiting for this cash and transit van to rock up the next day. So they were ready. Obviously, the cash and transit guys were obviously ready, and everybody armed and ready for whatever. And then I got the call out, or they called us in with a helicopter to say, okay, this is the area, but just hanging outside, out of sight and out of sound, all of those, but you must be close. So the moment we call you, you are there. So I was just there hanging around Hammanskraal, and the next moment they say, come. Yeah, and we flew in there, and I tell you, it was, now the cars are flipping chasing, and the guys are shooting. And I tell you, and if you haven't experienced that, and I can recall like yesterday, one of the guys from the task force chasing one of these robber cars, and now he tried to shoot, and his windscreen is in the way. And it was difficult to drive and to shoot. So long story short, he used his sidearm, and he shoot his own window out.
Oh, wow.
So he's got a clear sight now of the guys running away or chasing away. And and like I say, 11 of those guys were killed, and I think 4 injured and all of those. But it was a war zone.
Yeah, I can imagine,
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a nice thing to. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you, after a day like that, seeing stuff happening, like you said, now people being killed and so on, how do you come back and think to yourself and just unwind and say, you know what, I'm not going to let this get to me personally?
It is it feels like a movie when you think back at it and everything, and you close your eyes and you can actually see the different pictures, what happened, and think about it. Yeah, how we could have done it differently and all of those. And just by thinking about it, and now you start talking to the guys that were involved, and I suppose talking to each other and all of those, you unwind, eh?
Yeah, I can imagine.
But the police have the facility. If you have a problem, then they can assist
You with that.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've had some lows as well. And I want to maybe just start on that as well. There was an incident where you had an engine rollback on a King Air, I believe, as well.
Yeah, that was actually, if we, with the training, you must have heard that you have to train and you have to be ready, because it's not going to happen in Kavok situations with blue skies and the sun shining. So now we were this King on the way to Port Elizabeth. And there we sit over Lesotho in the ice, in the rubbish, all of those. And now I sit there and I can feel what's nice with the King is she's got the trim system on the yoke. But
what King is it?
King is C90.
Right.
She's got the trim system on the yoke with the switches, but she's got the wheel next to your knee. And I had the tendency, or still have it, flying it with my knee against the wheel. Now I can feel the wheel is turning, so the aircraft is trimming.
Right.
So why is she trimming? And now we're sitting there in the ice, aircraft is getting heavy with the ice, and now there are downdrafts and all of those. And I just felt this wheel turn, and it's turning, stopping, turning. Why is she doing this? And then as we went down the other side, with the serious downdrafts, she was busy pitching nose up because the autopilot was flying. And now with a downdraft, she was pitching nose up. So we started off with a ground speed, with the indicated airspeed at that height of like in 21,000 foot. You sit with an indicated airspeed of 155, maybe 160 knots. And with the trimming, and it was so hectic and all the ice, and now you have to put on all the windshield heats, and so you are busy getting rid of the ice. And if it wasn't for that wheel, and with the downdraft, she pulled the airspeed down to 110 knots.
What's still on the King Air?
They're in the vicinity of 80, 82, 83, but at that height it is much more.
Yes.
So if it wasn't for that, I promise you, she would have stalled, I'm sure. And then now we're picking up speed and we losing height to get speed and all of those, and with the weight and all of those. And then I saw on the torque gauge, the needle was starting to fluctuate. And I checked this needle fluctuating like that. I say, yeah, what is this now?
Yeah.
And the next moment, boom, there she falls like at the stop. I say, yeah, what's this?
The torque, right?
The torque needle. Whoop. No indication on the torque. Or there's indication like in 20%, 15, 20%, but that's it. And the rest of the gauges, the ITT and the N1 and all of those are normal, but the torque is down. Yeah, taking the throttle, you know the story, identify, verify, all of those, but playing with the throttle, nothing. But the rest of the gauges are good, and the one engine is good. And then say, okay, well, here we have to do something, and we have to go somewhere with this now. We're sitting in the ice over the berg and all of those. Hello, Bloemfontein, here we come.
Yeah.
And as I turned in, the windshield cracked. So now it is one engine rollback.
At what altitude were you now currently?
Like in 20,000 foot.
Right. And they've got a
one engine in the idle, and the windshield cracked, and as we descended, the ITT was going up and up and up, but we kept it there. But you couldn't do anything. So, and as the ITT reached the red mark, we cut the engine and secured the engine and all of those. Hello, Tower. Charlie Oscar Papa. We have a problem.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and it's actually you see it in the movies, but it's actually crazy to land at an airport with all the fire trucks and ambulances waiting for you, and yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
But that was the one incident. But then you had the other one as well, which was in a beach jet as well.
That was with a beach jet as well to Entebbe on our way to the Sudan, and on the descent, as we chopped the throttle of the descent, I just saw this little speck of a light, but it was gone. And as we started the descent, this light comes on again. Now I identify which light it is.
Yes.
So I push the enunciator, and then I saw, filter bypass.
Filter bypass.
Yeah, and then so I said, here, Brian, there's a light now, filter bypass, and it's a red one.
Oh.
He says, but you know what? We in the descent, let's just throttle back, totally idle,
Yeah.
and do the approach, and with the other engine is there. And long story short, now whether in Entebbe, you had to fly out, do wireless approach in the cloud and all of those. And as we overflew the field and we turned outbound there, this filter light comes on and it shines solid.
Yeah.
So in the cloud, in the rain, in everything, chopping the engine, flying the rest of the pattern and the approach with the other engine. Yeah, and as we landed, the pack still asked us, listener, this refueling stop of us, how long is that going to take? Said, a little bit longer than usual. We suggest go and sit there in the lounge.
Exactly.
We'll come and advise you. And 3 weeks later, then when we opened the filter bowl on the accessory gearbox, one of the bearings disintegrated, and it looked like you took a spoonful of glitter that you actually chucked in the filter bowl in the oil.
Yes.
So we were lucky.
Crazy. There was also I believe there was a BK117 story that you have to tell as well. Tell us about that.
Would you like to hear the BK? Yeah, the BK was first. The BK was first.
I'm going to get to the one in 2011 as well.
BK117, maintenance test flight, Eurocopter at Lensuria, they did the maintenance, but they don't have any pilots doing the maintenance test flights. So that was now on a Saturday, and those days we had a guy on standby the morning there at the National Heliport, working from, let's say, from 7 to 12. And so it was my shot, and then they needed a pilot for the maintenance. I said, well, let's go and fetch the machine. And while I'm hanging around there for the Saturday morning, we might as well do maintenance on the machine. And then in the police college, there's a little soccer field there, and then they had this little, what do you call it, kermis in English, a feed or something like
Carnival
that. Carnival type of thing. And then there was a microlight doing flipping from the soccer field over the row lines and power lines and all of those. Dangerous.
Right.
And I landed there with the BK and got out and said, guys, this microlight, because I spoke then to Swartkop Air Force Base.
Yes.
They didn't know about him.
Oh, so it was in controlled as well.
In controlled airspace, nobody knows about him. Dangerous flipping with a microlight in those conditions. I said, this microlight, end of story.
Cause trouble, yeah.
So then I just told the guys, listen, it's the end of the story. And so I flew back, from the soccer field, just back up on the top at the helipad. And my technician, Franz, was busy. We were busy with fuel topping, governor settings. And I went up having a cup of tea. And then these guys walked up to him while he was busy on the helicopter. And then they asked him where they'd like to speak to me. And then he assisted them on top, and then we just discussed, and I told him, this is not, it's out, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So they left then, okay, their microlight is now out of their party. And as we walked down, Franz told me, okay, fuel topping, governor, when I start, I must look for this, and I must look for that, and da-da-da. And long story short, we flew. And did what we need to do, and the last check on the fuel topping, governor, is you pull max continuous plus. You take a past your max continuous to see what you really can pull up to the red line.
Okay.
And as I pulled that master amount of power, I just heard this one hell of a bang. I thought I flew into a vulture or something, but it was quah, and then suddenly this whole aircraft was shaking like in
crazy.
Violently. I couldn't see a thing on the instruments, and the dashboard was hopping up and down.
How high were you?
Like in about 800,000 foot above the ground.
Okay.
And then personally, I thought that helicopter is going to break. And I'm over build-up area at that specific stage. And then I saw the highway there from Pretoria West going to Hartbeespoort Dam.
Yes.
And then I saw the highway, so I said to myself, you know what, this helicopter is going to break up. So let me get to the toll road. If it breaks, there are no people there. And then it gives me time if I have to splash it or do something, I have the whole road to use. Yeah, and then on the way there, I saw the Transworani School of the Death, and with the soccer field out of the blue here in the corner of my eye. And I promise you, the good Lord put that machine down there without making a dent in the grass. And we just said, hey, what happened? And then Frans got out, and I just saw he took his hands and put it in his hair.
Oh, yeah.
Long story short, the cowling came off in flight, and it through three of the blades. It charred that blade like a milli.
So how did it not just fall out of the sky then?
It's a proper helicopter.
Wow.
Because what it did, yes, actually, I didn't think it could work to bring the photographs here.
You can send it to me afterwards.
But anyhow, what happened then is, but really, you've never seen something like that in your life. And then one of the strips on the top of the tip of the blade went out, and this strip chewed a chunk out of the tail rotor as well. So now it is 3 blades and the tail rotor. Yeah. So long story short, they bugged Frans while he was busy. He put the cowling back, he never closed it, and I never did walk around to see that the cowlings were closed. But the good part for me about this story is, other than we are still alive and well today, is no one blamed the other to say, listen,
Wow.
it is your fault, you must have done this, you must have done that.
Collective.
Everybody just stood out and said, listen, this was my part
Sure.
in this story. And
Wow.
and the insurance took part of the rest, and
Sure.
yeah.
But then there was the big one. May 2011, if I have the timelines correct.
Yeah, I think it was Jan
Was it
2011? January 2011,
Right.
yes.
And there was an total engine failure.
Indeed.
I mean, like 96 wasn't bad enough. Then happened this, Jan 2011.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I tell you, my guardian angel is working overtime, eh?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But I
Well-
suppose if you, I just want to stop there, because I think anything, you can walk over the road now and you can get hit by a car. Like, that's just reality. But aviation is dangerous. It is a dangerous career. It's very safe to fly. I wouldn't say it's not safe to fly, but as a career, it's a dangerous career.
It is. We
Would
don't
you
have
agree?
we don't have wings. As a person, like a bird, and there are a lot of bolts and nuts and stuff that somebody must do to get the thing up in the. So many things can happen. But Colonel Brobeck told me this wise words the other day. He said, nothing can happen if you don't do anything. And with the 17,000 hours, so I've done something.
Yes.
So the possibility of picking something up that can happen is actually quite good, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us about that moment.
Well, you won't believe it. I was supposed to, that specific day actually, to take the Sovereign across with the National Commissioner to Nelspruit. But then the 500 was standing there with us in the hang and Wonderboom, and then the guys in Pretoria West, they needed a helicopter for conversion training. So I said, you know what I'll do is I'll quickly, before the flight, I'll take the machine, I'll hop across, come and pick up one of you guys, and just come and drop me. Then you have the helicopter, and I can carry on with my flight to Nelspruit in a jet. And yeah, it's per normal, huh? Took off all of those, over the Magalies, there at the port where the waterfall thingy is,
Yes.
on the way to Pretoria West. And and then just suddenly, boom, nothing. The yaw, the everything. Yeah, and that first, yes, and everybody tells you that time thing, it's like, and you say to yourself, what's this? But now the engine is gone, what's this? And then, this can't be. It's not possible. And then you look at these gauges. It is possible. Long story short, and in that time span that I realized, listen, this is now the real thing. I lost some RPM on the rotor, and as you know, in auto rotation, rotor RPM is critical. And then I ended up there, this little reserve there at the port, with a river running around it, so there's not a place to, and it was peak traffic on the road, so I couldn't put the machine down on the road at all.
Sure.
So, and I was now over this reserve, and then I saw these old dead blue gum trees, and then I just told myself, you know what, if I fly into those trees, I'm dead, because that whole machine is going to be smashed with the dry tree stumps and stuff. And then I saw on the other side of the trees, I saw this open clearing next to the river, and I said to myself, well, that's the only area. And then I said to myself as well, but you have to get over the trees. And then I said as well, but everything becomes so slow motion, and you can't believe, like I'm telling you now the story, that I was speaking to myself. You can't do this. It's not like in that type of thing. It becomes like in slower. And then I said, okay, but you have to get over the trees. Okay, but I'm low on RPM. Okay, what now? You have to get over the trees. Only one option, hope the RPM is enough.
Yeah.
So I pulled the collective. I managed to get over the trees, but it pulled the rest of the RPM down.
Oh, yeah.
And about 150 foot from the ground, she fell out of the air like a flippin',
150 is high.
yes, like a brick.
She's heavy.
But yeah, as you know, a helicopter is built for the impact from underneath.
Okay.
So yeah, the pilot that was my co-pilot on the jet, he sustained back injury, but not that bad. But yeah, I broke my back at 3 places, L1, 2, and 3. And yeah.
How did you get out?
Oh, yeah. Listen to this. Now I'm lying there with my white shirt and my tie and all of those. I'm on my way with a boss man to Nelspruit. And Shabir was terrified that he's going to burn inside the helicopter.
Sure.
And he was calling me he just said, Div, please man, help me, don't leave. Say, oh, Shabir, don't worry, I'll help you. So I opened his side and I pulled him out and I get him out of the helicopter and all of those. And when I was finished, I felt my back was just, it was sore.
Incredibly sore. Yeah.
And then I go and I lie flat on my back. And then I realized, my cell phone is still in my pocket. Lying on my back, and my back was so sore. And these 2 ladies over me, can they help me? What can they do? And all of those. Said, just dial this number for me. Lying there on my back next to the wreck, phone my ops room at Wannerboom, said, Dassie, Houston, we have a problem.
Yes.
I've had a crash. And she thought I was joking. So I said, no, I'm not. Please send the guys from the National Port with a squirrel to come and fetch us. So Shabir was good. They drove him with the ambulance, but they put me on a stretcher from the ambulance, and then they put me in the back of the helicopter, and then they flew me to Unitas Hospital.
But it is a miracle that it didn't catch alight, because I believe you had a lot of fuel still on board.
I still had a lot of fuel. Yeah, but it was wet. It was wet sand. It was the bank of the river, and that absorbed the serious impact. But yeah, Like I say, my guardian angel is working overtime.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I believe we can tell so many stories, but our time is starting to run out. I want to get to the pictures as well and the highlights and so on. But listen to this. I mean, your career locked 16,900, might be a little bit more now, up to date. And how's this? Almost 50-50 split between fixed wing and helicopter. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
How incredible is that?
Yeah, because as I told you previously, I started flying as fixed wing rated, but the helicopters was my forte. And then in the private sector, I had a lot of opportunities doing soil sampling and survey work and all of those when I put in holidays. So there I accumulated actually quite a lot of helicopter time. And then when I started flying on the fixed wing side, obviously the flying is much more on the helicopters. And so at the end of the day, it just ended up about the same. Eh?
Tell me about, there was a story of, I believe it was during the World Cup rugby. There was a story with you and a fire extinguisher and something just went south. Just tell us about this.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Yeah, and nobody forgets that story up to today. Those days, the 105s that we sold, they had what we call the FLIR cameras and the Night Sun and all of those. And the company, I think it was Irenco or Cumulus and all of those, they had these visitors, international visitors, but it was during the World Cup rugby. So they put up this whole big screen thing there at our pub there in Pretoria West between the two hangars. And yet now all the tables were laid with crystal glasses and nice eating ware, knives and forks, and everything was polished and all of those.
Yeah.
And the people coming there with the kids and they were dressed up and everything was just beautiful. And now this guy that is still running it, old JC, when he ends up with a microphone, you can't get enough from a microphone. When you hear he's on the microphone and wah, 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 wah. And then I warned him, I said, JC, leave that thing. And obviously now a couple of beers and all of those, ignore him. And then I gave him a last warning. I said, JC, if you do that again. Once more. And then obviously, and then I saw this fire extinguisher. But I didn't realize it was powder. I thought it was just I thought it was just this normal one that just hoists this flippin' vapor thing and then it's finished. So it was the powder thing, and it was one of those when you jettison the thing, it doesn't stop. So I promise you, that whole venue, the glasses, everything, the
and
people.
It's very corporate.
And it is very corporate. And it's white. Looked like snow. and the ladies grabbing the kids. My kid, everybody running out. It was chaos. And there's actually a joke about it, but we don't have the time to tell it. But then I told them this joke, and the joke ends up, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm fucking sorry.
That is unbelievable. Let's get to some of these pictures. I mean, you had the unbelievable privilege of flying. I don't want to tell the story. Maybe you should tell us about this picture. What is so significant about this?
That was during the Soccer World Cup. Those cheetahs you see there, it was their last operational flight. So Colonel Du Plessis and with the Air Force, he was our operational colonel, and he organized this whole force down of our business jet by the cheetahs. And so we had now these guys, the actors sitting in the back of the aircraft with stockings over their faces. Now this heavy guru thing. And then they had this whole route that they gave us to fly around Table Mountain. Oh, it was so awesome.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Now we have these specific points and they gave us a specific speed. So the cheetahs knew exactly where we were and at what speed and all of those. And then they rock up there and they actually look out of your window. And I still can't believe, I don't know if that specific picture is there, but look at the red helmet and look at the high nose.
Yes. Because they're
Pimples,
low.
man. And those two machines sitting with that high nose attitude on the wingtips of the Sovereign, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there they la, and they forced us down to Eysterplaat. And then we had this whole, now the top management is there in the control tower overlooking this whole thing, and now the aircraft's on the ground, and now it is this hostage negotiation, and and they couldn't stop. And now at the back of the aircraft, we had a cooler box with a couple of beers in. So now Doe is one of the gooks, and now he's got the stocking over his head, and he's got the firearm and all of those. I said, Doe, I know it is not in the script,
Yeah.
but now you're going to take me out of this aircraft, and you're going to take me to the bird, and we're going to fetch the cooler box.
Yeah.
And while you're playing your movie thing here, I'm thirsty.
Yeah.
I would love to have a beer. So now the door is open, and the cooler, and we take out the cooler box here, and the commissioner says, "Here, that is different, Brian. There, they flipping having a beer now. We must stand and watch this." So it was a good ending.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's fantastic to see that thing on a BizJet's wingtip.
Yes.
Oh man.
Hey, fam, I mean, look at the scenery that you've got, like you said, there behind you in Cape Town. What a beautiful sight that is.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
No, what a privilege. And not a lot of people can say that, eh?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, like you said now, so the cheetahs never flew after that?
That, what I understood, that was their last operational sortie. Yeah.
Yes.
End of a career for them as well.
But you've also had the privilege of flying a few air shows as well. I want to get this up quickly. Look at this. Tell us about this.
This was again Colonel Doe du Plessis. It was his last organizing of a air show with us and the Air Force. So he had this whole thing that our aircraft has been hijacked, and now the Hawks. We flew around Pretoria with those guys. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
So we flew around all of those, and now they have this formation thing. One oak sitting on the wingtip for us, and the other oak is behind us to make sure we're not going to fly away of all of those. And then, lekker low-level circuit, and with the Hawks on the wingtips, and then we landed, and then the helicopters came, and they downroped the Special Task Force, and the bomb squad coming there.
Sounds like fun, eh?
Oh, man.
Yeah, I can
I tell you, doing that for a living, eh?
Yeah. And look at this. This is also probably the same show, right?
Yeah, let me just see. Yeah, I think that was after the whole katoot when I was finished.
Yes.
I made the turn, and that was my last fly past and Brian Emmons doing the. Yeah, look at that, eh? Look at that.
Yeah, that is beautiful.
Yeah, she is.
Goosebumps as I was watching this.
I tell you.
And look at the climb rate on that thing.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, of course, I wanted to get to this as well. I think it was down in Virginia, where you also did a low flyby as well. Tell us about this as well. Well, it's more like a runway inspection, right?
Yeah, you must specify now. There's a difference
Yeah.
between low-level fly past and a runway inspection.
Please give us the rundown of that.
The police had a police day show in town in Durban with the Sovereign and PC-6 Porter, and then I think they were like in 2 or 3 helicopters. So the whole idea is everybody's on the ground, and then the helicopters come and they do the fly past, and then the Porter, and then we follow with the jet last. But they were there south of Durban, far out, and we had a lot of time. Obviously, the jet is fast, and we must get over specific points, so we are close by for this fly past. And they were not there, and so we had time to spend. And I know the ATC, and then talking about flying here and flying there, and he said, would you care for a runway inspection?
Nice.
And then circuit clear, and say, well, let's do a runway inspection. So we did a runway inspection, little bit higher as the last one. So, but then we were still not ready because it was a practice for the next day.
Yeah.
So we still had time to kill. And So he said, would you care for another runway inspection? So, yeah, well, with the wind blowing, all of those, let's see what the sand and stuff is on the runway.
Yes. Yeah.
So obviously to see the sand and all of those on the runway, we had to go a little bit lower. And then some other, but it was awesome. And then somewhere we picked up flagged along the line, the mole inspectors or something. But just for those people, it was controlled and it was safe.
Yeah, but look at this. I mean, as we watch this, it is unbelievable. But you know that aircraft so well.
Yeah, like I say, I was fortunate to fetch her with 0 hours on the clock. She's got now 3,200 and I have like in 2,400 hours on type.
No ways.
Yeah.
No ways.
Yeah.
What a video and what material this is. Let's just talk about this as well. I mean, look at this as well. You're flying the?
This is the MD500. Yeah, it's now, it is to show the public and the kids at the school. They had this whole thing around youth and kids getting abused and all of those. So we have this program with the cops that we go to the police, to the schools, and then they speech to them and tell them what they should and should not do. And then part of it's visual and they enjoy the helicopter and all of those. And this specific one, the security helicopter was involved there flying the headmaster of the school in. And then, we were there making a turn or 2 or 3 and
nice
part of the show.
And again, inspiring the young ones, to get involved in aviation as well, which is so special.
Oh, yes.
I think we need to wrap up, but I want to wrap up with these 2 videos over here, right? You had just recently, you wrapped up your career. And I mean, getting to the end of a 46-year career, tell us about, if you had to sum it up, like the last 46 years in your aviation journey, if you had to sum it up, it's a tough one, but if you had to sum it up, how would you sum up your career?
It's easy.
Fairy tale?
I had a ball.
Wow.
I had a ball. And it beats working for a living.
Yes. Yes.
No, but to summarize it, I had a ball.
Tannie Karen, she's very well known here at Wonderboom Airport. Everybody knows Tannie Karen.
Yes, we do.
And she gave you another one of those on your very last flight that you came in to come and land the beautiful aircraft. Take us through this moment.
Yeah, you know what? It's emotional, because since I know it is my last flight, and I somehow they knew that was going to be my last flight. So I've been somebody behind my back again, I'm sure, like in with the helicopter, with the water and the fire trucks. And we came back from Pilanesberg, and then she just said to me, since it's my last flight, would I care for a runway inspection? I said, Karen, it would be cherry on the cake after this long time.
Yeah.
But it was not that low. 250 knots, 20 foot. Oh, man. What a ball.
And then, like you said now, you had the other moment as well. And this is the video that I referred to right in the beginning, where I started crying when I watched this. Talk us through this.
You know what, that one photo that we saw now with old Choppy sitting next to me, my crew, my pillar, my helping hand, my everything. Behind my back, let me tell you the story. Just before this, I did my flight test on the Sovereign, and I asked him, said, Choppy, when I went, because he's now friends with the guys with the fire station and everybody at the airport. So I said, man, organize the fire trucks for me now. Like in the movies.
Yes.
When I come back, then I'd like the water as well. It's the end of my career. You can do that. You know these guys.
Yes.
And then he came with this lame excuse, the thing is leaking. But one was leaking, actually.
Right.
So, but they were not serviceable. No, you can't do it. And so, Sarel with the other 500, he had an operation in Soweto. And then when he came back, he didn't park the helicopter yet to hang at Wonderboom. He parked it at Pretoria West at the National Heliport. and Sarol is staying in Brits. So then the excuse was on the Saturday, because I asked for no farewell party because it's emotional. I just want to disappear with my horse in the sunset, and then Sarol, Choppy said, no, Sarol can't this and that and what, and if I can, do I mind to go and pick up the helicopter and just bring it back? And then I just have to pick up the commander that we must do 1 or 2 sorties over Mamelodi with the helicopter. So I said, well, while I'm busy, let's do it. And so, come in, normal approach, and then he told me, and then the ATC started speaking to me, say, Colonel de Villiers, so many years, and thank you,
Yes.
all of those.
Sure.
Good afternoon. Zulu Sierra Romeo Fox Hotel.
Zulu Sierra Romeo Foxtrot Hotel, hartlike goeiemiddag. Die clearmark QNH 1025, runway 29 is active. Remain south, runway 29, all times report. Final approach, runway 06.
Hartlike goeiemiddag, South of 1129 via 06 for the police and the fence, Romeo Fox Hotel, and copy your access.
Foxtrot Hotel. Lieutenant Colonel de Villiers, thank you for your dedicated service in the South African Police Service. 36 years flying for the Air Wing with 16,900 hours on fixed wing and helicopters. May you still have safe landings. Romeo Fox Hotel, you're cleared for final landing. Call safe on the ground. Next.
Baie dankie, ek waardeer. Call you safe at the hangar, Romeo Fox Hotel. Congratulations, sir. Thank you for your service. Pleasure is always mine.
And then, so I thought this was Choppy's way to make up for the fire trucks that I couldn't get water on the Sovereign. And then he approached, he said, listen, you must slow down and go down. I say, hey, I can't slow down and go down here between the hangars and all the aircraft. And we land in front of the hangar normally, and I saw the cars. He said, you can't land there, you must land on the other side. And I didn't even
you're
suspect
confused
nothing.
now. Yeah.
So, and as I did the approach to the front of the hangar, and I saw the cars, and him very adamant that I mustn't land there. I must pick up the commander on the other side. And as I turned, it's the first time that I saw the cars and I saw the fire trucks with the water.
Yeah.
And immediately, man, water outside, water down my eyes. Very emotional. Yes, I tell you, I cried like a baby.
Yeah, I actually
Yeah.
heard that audio on the ATC as well.
Oh, yeah, no, look at that. Yeah.
When you said that. And this is special. Like, look
It
at
is, eh? People that walked a journey with me, that cared about me, that did this for me.
Tell us about the people that was there.
You know what? I thought, when I saw these people, I thought, yes, maybe they saw the helicopter and the fire trucks and all of those. And now they're here for the show, because it's looking spectacular, man. And as I landed, and I looked, I said, but you see, man, I know this face. And I look in front, but I know this guy, and I know this guy. You know what? I know everybody. Then it was my girl Renee that in Kalen and Choppy lying behind my back, and they organized this whole farewell party with the end of this, as you can see, getting out of the helicopter with one of my previous generals that I worked with. And then they organized this whole for a couple of months behind my back. And the last couple of days, I tried to get as much flying in as possible, and they just had to keep me from the hangar because they were busy preparing the hangar for my party.
Yeah.
And there I arrived, and oh man, I couldn't stop the tears.
Look at that.
Yeah, no, it was so emotional to me.
Yeah. And we're just watching the scenes of that.
I tell you, what a life.
Who's that?
That is my sister, and that is Renee, my girl that organized the party. That one is my brother-in-law. And you know what was so special about this? Normally when we're having a farewell party, it's just your colleagues, but I ended up here with my family, personal family, my kids and my grandkids, and it was too much. Look at that. And this is old Daniel, my old cleaner that retired last year. Now I'm part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was out of this world.
What happened on this evening? Can you share us? Because I believe there was a big party afterwards.
Man, yeah, it was no, not like in a all fall down as we call it, but it was proper. And what was nice is a lot of guys from the special task force that I had operations in the past with, and pilots that I shared helicopters and aeroplanes, and we flown together. And like I said, this whole thing was organized behind my back, and everybody knows somebody that knows me. And then they got all of them together, and like I say, like a spit braai, and everybody was there,
nice.
and then it was photo sorties the whole evening, and then it was sharing war stories, and oh man.
What was in this glass, Lieutenant Colonel?
That was beer.
Well,
And this is General Annandale, one of my old commanders as well. Yeah, look at that. Too much, huh? Yeah, getting a tear in my eye again.
yeah. But what a beautiful
You know what? I'm so privileged that, like I told you, I just wanted to disappear because it's all I know in my life. So emotional, and I told my commanding officer, I don't want a party. When you have your year-end function towards the end of the year, then I'm over all of this. You send me an invite, and then we do the year-end function and my farewell party all in one. And then obviously Renee decided, after a career like that, I can't just disappear with my horse in the sunset. And then they organized this whole bash. And the Vumi that I flew my last flight with the minister and the commissioner, and he asked me about that specific, how I feel about the farewell. I said, well, Vumi, I didn't want a farewell. I said, and now after this, I said, my life would have been poorer if I haven't had that party.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you, again, an unbelievable career and into a beautiful career as well. And I believe I just want to get this photo up as well. And I believe this was your best friend that you spoke about the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure I'm not allowed to share on this, swear on this, but that ook, he's such a pillar. And I've never seen him cross in my life, and I've been hard on him. There's no excuses. If I ask him or tell him something and he comes up with a lame excuse, choppy, zap, choppy that. But he was always there for me, always walking the extra mile. And we had this thing, virtually phoning each other every morning. Choppy, what changed? What is happening? Because my whole life is around the phone call. I must be at standby, and the moment the phone rings. So when something happens or there's a heads up, he phones me, says, listen, be prepared, there might be a flight in the afternoon. So we came in the habit phoning each other every morning. Choppy, how are you? What have I missed? That type of thing. Yeah, and we still carry on with it a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to miss him.
Tell me about the plans for you. I mean, obviously being retired now after such a beautiful career, what is the plan for you going forward now?
I suppose, like most of the pilots, as long as we have a flying medical, I'm going to carry on flying. Because they still haven't started training crew to replace me. And like I say, with 2,400 hours on the belt on the jet, I have a rough idea what's happening around us. So I still haven't notched a lot of knowledge to swear or to share with them.
Yeah.
And so that is the plan. And to see if I can still assist. And while I told the boss lady, I'm willing and able. If we can make a plan, all we need is the right signature on the right piece of paper. So maybe I'm lucky and we can carry on. Because, like I say, I have such a passion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's see. And, yeah, while on the civilian side, on my way to Gabon on the 20th of this month for like in a 4-week stint, flying there for a company that's starting up a mine there with the BK117. And, yeah, a charter here and a charter there. But definitely
Still
not,
gotta
not,
stay
the,
there.
not the end of the career for me for now.
Not planning on going sitting on the
No,
beach now
no.
with long glasses and
No.
straws and some umbrellas.
Coming back to my uncle in the furniture business,
Yes.
Colonel Broberg.
Yeah.
He's now, I think he's gusting 80. And that man is so busy. Busy training, busy conversions, busy in prof checks, busy. And he's a tall guy with big shoes. And all I say, listen, I have to work hard to fill those shoes. Or just to. And if I can carry on being healthy and operating like him at that age, well, what a privilege.
Lieutenant Colonel de Villiers, it was a privilege and an honor. I think I speak for the whole of the country when I say this. I salute you where I'm sitting here today. Just to be in your presence. I mean, I'm a newly qualified pilot, PPL pilot working towards my commercial, and I look up to you, sir.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I really think that I'm speaking for the whole country, because there was a lot of times where you offered up your life, really. I mean, we had the crashes, everything else that happened, and you survived that. And it was all for the service of people all around us in the country of South Africa, and protecting and just doing what you do best. And I salute you for a beautiful career. I think it was, for me again, a privilege to sit down with you today and to tell your story. And I thank you for a beautiful, beautiful career for 46 years. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for sharing the stories today.
I thank you so much. And when you came to me with this, I thought the time at hand, how are we going to kill this time? And, I still a lot of, as we spoke, now here's my memory banks are open. I have a lot of more stories to tell. Maybe I must write a book.
Please do. Please do that. It'll be great to have it.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, if you had one more word for everybody to say, you could do it in that camera, and then we'll wrap it up for this interview. Thank you so much again, and all the best for you.
Thank you so much. First of all, for my colleagues in the police that I left behind, there's a thing that we call emotional decision. Everybody gets annoyed and angry and all of those. And then we make an emotional wrong decision. And down the line, you tell yourself, yeah, it was the wrong decision. So all I want to tell you guys, when you are getting cross and furious with the cops, breathe, get over it, take leave, 1, 2, 3 days, whatever it takes. But think before you make that emotional decision. Most of the time, it's the wrong one. I've been there, I've seen that movie, but I managed not to make the wrong one. And for my aviation colleagues, it's a difficult road. And if you do it just before it, because it looks glorified and all of those, it looks like it to be a pilot and all of those. Maybe not the right place for you. It's hard work. You must have a passion to do that. And if you have a passion, and if it's in your heart, irrelevant how difficult the road is, hang in there, you're going to make it. That's what I can say.